case. This is Street versus Taylor. Are the parties here and ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, we'll take up any housekeeping matters and then pretrial motions if you have any. Plaintiff, any housekeeping we need to take up?
Yes, good morning, Your Honor. Philip Minecoth on behalf of Ms. Jordan Street. We do have a couple of brief housekeeping matters. First, it's my understanding that witnesses have been provided with the exhibits prior to trial. My intention is to run through the foundation of any that I plan to enter into evidence off screen, just having them refer to those. And then once they're entered, ask permission to publish via share screen.
Okay.
And secondly, Your Honor, it's our understanding that given the rules of this forum, if the defense chooses not to call a specific deposition witness who is unavailable, we would be allowed to call that witness to read in portions of their transcript. I would ask the court's preference on whether or not you would prefer us to call that witness and read those portions of the transcript during our case in chief, or if we should wait until the defense's case in chief and see if they choose or choose not to call that witness.
I'm sorry. So are you asking about witnesses who are...
Yes, Your Honor. Let me be a little clearer about that. I apologize. So in this case, we have two unavailable witnesses, one for the plaintiff and one for the defense, who have had transcripts that may be read into or depositions rather, that may be read into the case. We have provided opposing counsel with copies of the portions that we plan on reading in. It's my understanding of the rules of the forum that should opposing counsel choose not to call their unavailable witness, we would still be given the opportunity to read in portions of that witness's transcript. I would ask if you would prefer us to then read that witness's transcript during our case in chief, since we won't have the opportunity to know whether or not that witness will be called until the defense begins their case.
I believe you have the opportunity to call them as a rebuttal witness after the defense closes their case in chief. So we'll handle it like that.
Certainly. Thank you, Your Honor. And with that, I have no further housekeeping matters. However, I do have one substantive motion to bring before the court.
We will take up defense housekeeping and then move on to your substantive matter.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Ms. Lady?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, if I may, it's actually pronounced Lighty.
Lighty. My apologies.
I should have corrected earlier. We don't have any housekeeping matters, although we would ask that Reese Taylor, as the defendant in this case, be constructively considered present at all times during the trial, and that Aubrey Saracen, who is the plaintiff's witness, who is not actually the plaintiff in this case, just a witness, not be considered constructively in the courtroom throughout the entire trial.
Mr. Minecoth.
Minecoth, Your Honor. We have no objection to the witness being constructively sequestered, of course, so that they can hear when they're called up.
Very well. That's what we'll do.
Thank you.
If there's nothing housekeeping related from the defense, we'll move on to plaintiff's pretrial motion.
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff has one motion to bring before the court today. We're happy to announce that we were able to meet with Ms. Lighty prior to trial today and discuss this, and we have actually come to a stipulation. We will be excluding any reference to or admission of Exhibit 12 from trial today. This is a handwritten note that was found in a classroom, and we're having this excluded as it's prejudicial and not relevant to the case at hand.
Ms. Lighty, is that the case?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Very well. Exhibit 12 is excluded.
And Your Honor, that is all the motions on behalf of the plaintiff.
All right, moving on to the defense's motions.
Yes, Your Honor. We, again, we were able to settle with opposing counsel, so we don't have any motions in limine. That we would like to note for the record that we were able to stipulate that opposing counsel will not be offering evidence regarding Coach Reese Taylor's prior incident that occurred at University High School. This testimony can be found on pages 11 and 12 of Reese Taylor's deposition. And so we would just like that noted for the record.
It's noted that the parties have agreed that there will be no discussion of Reese Taylor's prior employment. Was that the correct?
Specifically, if I may be clear, Your Honor, there was an incident that occurred at University High School in which Coach Taylor was the coach of a team and had allegedly pushed or shoved down another student. And it's specifically that testimony that we've agreed to exclude from this trial.
That's your understanding as well, Mr. Meinkoff?
Yes, Your Honor, and if I may just add a brief clarification so that I'm understanding that I'm on the same page. I don't plan, Coach Taylor is a coach at Waco High School and has had previous coaching employment before. I completely agree that I don't plan on eliciting that specific incident at previous employment or why Coach Taylor chose to leave previous employment. However, I do think I will be asking one question, just that this job at Waco was not their first job, but I will not be delving into any realm about the details of other employment, just that this is not the first time coaching.
Very well. Is that your understanding as well, Ms. Leidy?
Yes, Your Honor.
And we've noted that on the record. Anything further from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor, just two more things. They're not motions in limine, but I would like to note for the court that there does seem to be a lighting issue in the courtroom in which I'm presenting. Specifically, it's motion censored, and at times, even though I'm moving, the lights may turn off. So if that does happen, if we may just pause the time, so I may turn the lights back on.
We will. It's a brand new world with Zoom and whatnot.
Thank you. And then finally, during opening statements, I do intend to not only introduce myself, but my second chair, as well as Reese Taylor. If at that time, if both Mr. White and Ms. Taylor can momentarily turn their cameras back on, just as an acknowledgement to the court, and then they can resume going dark again.
That'll be fine.
And nothing further from the defense, Your Honor.
All right, then we will proceed with opening statements. Mr. Meinkoff, whenever you're ready.
Something seemed different with Rory that day. Those are the fatal and fateful words of Coach Reese Taylor, the defendant, describing the star soccer player that was about to die. But Coach Taylor, she didn't take action. She didn't step in. She didn't offer help. Just a few minutes before 18-year-old Rory Street's collapse, convulsions, and tragic but preventable death, the harsh words of her soccer coach pierced the 105-degree Texas air. Come over here, and I'll show you how not special you are. Those were the words of the adult on the field. The person responsible for over a dozen young athletes, the person who those athletes were intimidated by. And Coach Taylor ignored warnings and safety precautions for 105-degree heat. Tragedy struck. Rory Street was a young star high school soccer player. When she showed up for her varsity practice at Waco High, Coach Taylor quickly noticed that something seemed different with Rory that day. On September 7th of 2018, Rory Street, a healthy, athletic soccer player, showed up to her afternoon practice like she had done many times before for years. When she started to miss wide open goals, when she started struggling to find her position on the field, started having trouble responding and hearing Coach Taylor's criticisms, Coach Taylor thought she was dogging it. Rory Street wasn't asked what was wrong. She wasn't given a break to mentally recoup. She wasn't handed water. Instead, her coach decided that she was misbehaving. She had an attitude, and attitude needs discipline. It was scorching hot that afternoon. Reese Taylor thought her star student athlete needed discipline due to this perceived attitude. And so Rory Street was sent to perform a drill known as running Burma Road. This drill, which you'll hear more about throughout trial today, is an intense cardio disciplinary drill. As an athletic trainer watched from the distance, another young soccer player, Aubrey Saracen, was also being disciplined via the Burma Road drill. Ms. Saracen noticed that Rory, her close friend and longtime teammate, was starting to sweat profusely, was looking very pale, and was really struggling. Rory even complained about feeling funny and chest pains. But when Rory appeared to still be dogging it, still be goofing off to Coach Taylor decided to discipline her in a way that no one had ever seen before. She lined up the rest of the soccer team across from Rory about 10 yards. She then instructed Rory to begin dribbling a ball back and forth as the first person in that line would run at her and perform a slide tackle to take the ball away. This wasn't a drill, this was a disciplinary measure. And as that person slide tackled into Rory, she collapsed onto the ground. But before she could get back up, Coach Taylor was over her, yanking her back. This happened over and over again. Run, tackled to the ground, yanked back up. Run, tackled to the ground, yanked back up. This happened 15 times. But on that 15th time, Rory collapsed to the ground and began convulsing. She died under that Texas heat. An ambulance was called, but it was too late. Rory never got back on the soccer field again. Rory's loving mother, Jordan Street, has brought this wrongful death lawsuit. Like any parent, Jordan loved her child. They had many wonderful experiences together. They both loved competing and they both loved soccer. From the time Jordan Street taught Rory to play kicking a ball around in the backyard, soccer was something they shared. The many meets were a bond that the two had. Miss Street never imagined that the sport they both loved would take her daughter's life. Never imagined that Rory would die under the gaze of her own coach. Jordan Street's lawsuit alleges that Coach Reese Taylor was negligent on September 7th of 2018, and that negligence caused Rory's death. As the plaintiff, we have a burden to prove this to you by a preponderance of the evidence. The court is aware, meaning that we must show that this was more likely than not. Essentially, we have to prove that a reasonable person using ordinary care would have seen the dangers in the discipline being given out under that 105-degree heat and that it might foreseeably lead to this tragedy. The question essentially boils down to this. Should a coach, the person responsible for more than a dozen young people, have a duty to prevent the death of one of those young people by heat stroke? I'm going to hear a medical doctor's conclusions today. Dr. Reagan McConaughey has been a doctor for nearly 25 years. He has several degrees in biology and chemistry. He's a cardiologist. He specializes in the study of the heart. And after reviewing Rory's autopsy, which said that Rory died of sudden cardiac arrest, Dr. McConaughey concluded that heat exhaustion and heat stroke caused this fatal condition. Dr. McConaughey found that it was the extreme and dangerous conditions she was subjected to. And despite this tragedy, I expect you'll hear from Coach Taylor today. I expect Coach Taylor will tell you that she wouldn't have done anything differently. Instead, she'll blame Rory's death on Rory. I expect that the defendant is going to try and tell you that all of this happened because during that autopsy, 60 nanograms per milliliter of cocaine were found in Rory's system. They too have brought an expert today, an expert report which concluded that this nominal amount of cocaine, and those aren't my words, those are the words of the defense's own expert, this nominal amount of cocaine caused Rory's death. Not the 105-degree temperatures, not the actions of Coach Taylor, but this nominal amount of cocaine. What you're going to hear today is that Rory had numerous symptoms consistent with heat stroke. Pale skin, weakness, disorientation, profuse sweating, seizures. Rory had every single one of these symptoms before she passed away. And not only should Coach Taylor have known better, Coach Taylor did know better. She was trained on proper safety protocols for weather practices just 3 months prior to Rory's death. She knew, as did every other coach in the state of Texas, that hot weather practices require regular breaks for water. And by regular, it's clear that when the temperature reaches over 100 degrees, as it was on that September day, you need breaks for water every 15 minutes. But 2 hours, into that heated practice session, Rory Street wasn't afforded that break. She wasn't handed a bottle of water. Something was wrong. Something was different with Rory that day. Coach Taylor never acted. Didn't intervene when her star player was sweating profusely, disoriented, and really struggling. Instead, she turned to discipline. It was that discipline, that negligence, which caused Rory Street's death. At the end of trial, I'm going to review all the evidence we see and hear in trial. I'm going to ask you to find the only one person saw something was different with her star player and failed to act. We will ask you to find justice for a mother who lost her daughter and for a young athlete who lost her life. Thank you.
Opening statement for the defense, Ms. Leidy.
Yes, Your Honor.
Proceed when you're ready.
It wasn't the coach. It was the cocaine. Not a single person on that soccer field on September 7th, 2018 knew that Rory Street had cocaine in his system, because Rory kept that information to himself. He told no one. Not his teammates, not the trainer, and certainly not his coach. And the sad truth is, all of the discipline, intervention, and safety measures could not have prevented this tragedy. Because when it came to Rory Street's death, it wasn't the coach. It was the cocaine. Good morning. My name is Simone Leidy, and along with my co-counsel, Joshua White, we have the honor of representing my client, Reese Taylor, or as she's better known around these parts, Coach. Now, before I talk to you about Coach Taylor, I want to pause. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the pain that the Street family must be feeling, because I think everybody acknowledges that this is a tragic incident. No parent should ever have to deal with burying their child. Now, I expect that throughout trial, you may see a photo of Rory Street. And in that picture, you'll be able to see the hope in his eyes and all of the potential that he had, not only as a soccer player, but just his future in general. But when you're confronted with the tragedy of his death, there is a desire to make someone answer, to hold someone responsible, and to make someone pay. We expect that's what opposing counsel is counting on today. But just because there's a tragic death does not mean that there's someone to blame. And in this case, it's certainly not Coach Reese Taylor. So let's get to know her a little bit better. Coach Taylor was born and raised right here in Waco, Texas. Well, except for the time that she went to A&M to get a degree in physical education. And you see, following college, she returned right back home and secured a position at her alma mater, Waco High. See, at Waco High School, not only is she a coach of just about every sport under the sun, but Coach Taylor is also a health professor. She's dedicated the better part of the last 26 to 30 years looking after student athletes. And her training in physical education and her experience as a health teacher helps her do just that. See, soccer is a physical sport, and high schoolers can be fickle. Soccer games are long, but soccer seasons are even longer. And so to help athletes maximize their potential, Coach Taylor pushes them with repetition, conditioning, and drills. For Coach Taylor, keeping up on the latest and best coaching methods is important. Not only because it helps her make sure that she's the best coach that she can possibly be, but because it's in the best interest of the students. Coach loves those kids, every single one of them, and Rory is no different. Every single day, she pushes her students to be better. And September 7th, 2018 was no different. You see, that afternoon, the team was running a full team scrimmage, simulating one of the games that they would experience later on in the season. But from the moment that Rory Street showed up at practice, Coach Taylor noticed that something was wrong. You see, that's a point that we will agree on with opposing counsel. But the difference here is that what was wrong wasn't heat exhaustion or heat stroke. Rory wasn't mentally in the game. In other words, Rory was just goofing off. What you're going to hear today is that a star player of the team, who normally had ease in finding his position first, passing the ball to somebody else, making sure that he's playing with perfection instead of being sloppy, and being able to make goals, all of that stuff came naturally to Rory Street. But on September 7th, 2018, Rory was sloppy. He wasn't in the right positions. He couldn't even make easy passes. And most importantly, when there was a goal, I didn't have any defenders or goalies in front of it, Rory somehow couldn't make that. But what you're also going to hear today is that when Coach Taylor noticed all of this, there was nothing physically wrong with Rory. In fact, Rory showed no signs that the heat was bothering him. Nobody else showed signs that the heat was bothering them. And so because he thought that Rory was goofing off and he wasn't taking the scrimmage seriously, he sent him to run Burma Road. We now know, and as you'll learn today, that unbeknownst to Coach Taylor, Rory arrived at practice, cleats on, the cocaine in his system. And that essentially created a ticking time bomb situation the moment that he stepped on a field where he knew he would be practicing in the afternoon, scorching heat, and he'd be exercising strenuously. See, cocaine can cause a couple things to your system. But most importantly, cocaine can constrict your blood vessels. It can raise your body temperature. It can increase your heartbeat in a way that's irregular and the rhythm is off, and it makes it really difficult to do normal activities. But what it can also do is something called hyperthermia. And what you're going to hear today is basically that's the process where your body's natural cooling system can't process properly. And so when you arrive on a soccer field knowing that it's about to be a very physical afternoon, and you have cocaine in your system, you know, or at least you should, that you might be at risk. So in a practice where Rory's teammates were otherwise fine in the heat, the cocaine in Rory's system invited tragedy. So after a while, Coach grew tired because Rory was again goofing off at Burma Road. And you're going to hear that Burma Road was a tradition. It wasn't anything new. And in fact, as far as anybody can tell, no one's ever been injured or hurt at Burma Road before. But you see, when Rory was goofing off again during this drill, what you're going to hear is that, well, the coach decided to do something more. A slide tackling drill. Slide tackling drills are nothing new for soccer practice. In fact, slide tackles are something that not only do you practice regularly, but you have to perform and execute regularly in games as well. And for a star player like Rory, would not only practice it, but executed it and perfected that, well, this is nothing new. This is something that the coach had seen her complete with ease time and time again. But I want to make one thing very clear. When Coach Taylor speaks to you today, she's going to explain exactly her reasoning behind implementing this new procedure. When you have a star player like Rory Taylor, who's not taking practice seriously, who knows that all the other kids are looking up to him as an example, well, you want to make sure that that star athlete is alert, is agile, and is paying attention. And that's exactly what the slide tackle drill did. Unfortunately, in the middle of that drill, Rory suddenly collapsed. But I want to make this clear, what you're going to hear throughout this trial, and especially from our expert, is that this wasn't the cause of heat exhaustion or heat stroke, but the cocaine running through Rory's veins. That's why later on in this trial, I'm going to show you an autopsy report and a toxicology report. That toxicology report is going to show you there was 60 nanograms per milliliter of cocaine in Rory Street's system. And when it came to the cause of death, we agreed. Rory suffered a sudden cardiac attack. Well, what's more importantly, what you're going to hear is that the coroner could not determine what caused it. And it's our position that it was the cocaine. That every symptom that was allegedly seen by Aubrey Saracen was in fact the result of cocaine use, not heat exhaustion. At the end of this trial, we're going to get a chance to speak again and revisit exactly what happened on September 7th, 2018. Exactly how Rory Street put himself at risk. It's at that time that I'm going to ask that you find Coach Reese Taylor not liable. Because as tragic as this is, Rory's death wasn't the coach. It was the cocaine. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Leidy. Just so that both parties are aware, I will be giving you a time check after the plaintiff's case closes and then after the defense case in chief closes before closing arguments. We're going to try to run through things as quickly as possible, so y'all are welcome to grab a drink while I'm running up the math, but we're going to keep a pretty strict timetable otherwise.
Certainly.
Thank you.
With that, Mr. Meinkoff, you can call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiffs would call Aubrey Saracen to the stand.
You can proceed when ready.
Morning, Ms. Saracen. Would you please introduce yourself and spell your last name for our record?
Hi, I'm Aubrey Saracen. That's Saracen.
And Aubrey Saracen, I just want to ask you, do you know someone named Rory Street?
Yes, Rory was one of my best friends.
And how long were you two best friends?
I've known her my whole life. We've grown up doing soccer together, and we were teammates on the high school soccer team.
I want to talk more about that relationship, but I'd like for you to look at Exhibit 3, please.
Okay.
Let me know when you're looking at that.
Sure. One moment. Okay.
Do you recognize Exhibit 3?
Yeah, that's Rory.
And what is it exactly?
It's a picture of her. I don't remember what dance that was from, but it looks like homecoming or prom or something.
Is that a fair and accurate representation of what Rory Street looked like around September 7th of 2018?
Yeah, it is.
All right, we would move Exhibit 3 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 3 is admitted.
Permission for my co-counsel to publish via the share screen.
You may.
So, Ms. Saracen, you mentioned that you two were classmates. Where did you attend high school?
At Waco High.
You mentioned that you both played soccer. Did you play there at Waco High?
We did.
Well, thank you, Mr. Olson. I'd like to ask you, how was Rory as a soccer player?
She was incredible. Honestly, she was the best one on the team. And I think if she hadn't died, she would have gone on to play Division I at least, or if not gone pro.
Now, you just mentioned that Rory died. When did Rory die?
She died on September 7th during a soccer practice.
Well, I want to jump into the details of that soccer practice, but first I'd like to discuss your soccer practices more generally before we get into that specific.
Sure.
Now, you mentioned that you were players at Waco High. Where did you guys have practice?
We had practice on the outside practice field at the high school.
And I'd like for you to look at Exhibit 2, please.
Okay. I've got it.
All right. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
Could you please tell us what you're looking at?
So it looks like a bird's eye view of the high school practice fields. And there's a blue box over what looks like the practice field where we would hold our scrimmages and drills and stuff. And then the red box is where we would run Burma.
All right. Ms. Saracen, I'm going to ask you a little bit more about those boxes in just a moment. But first, does that fairly and accurately portray what your soccer field looked like around September of 2018?
Yes.
All right, I would move Exhibit 2 in evidence.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 2 is admitted.
And permission for my co-counsel to publish.
You may.
So, Ms. Saracen, just a second ago, you mentioned this blue box. What is this blue box showing us?
That's the practice field.
Right, and now what about this red box right next to it?
That's where coach would have us run Burma Road.
All right. Before we talk about what Burma Road is, you mentioned coach. Who was that?
That's Coach Reese Taylor.
All right. And so tell us a little bit about Burma Road. What is that?
So Burma is a Waco High tradition. And it is an exercise where if we're not playing very well or whatever, coach will make us do it. And basically you run for 30 yards and then you dribble a soccer ball for 30 yards and then you score into an unmanned goal. And then you have to bear crawl all the way back and then do it as many times as possible.
All right. So I'd now like to turn to the soccer practice you were mentioning on September 7th of 2020.
Okay.
First, Your Honor, I would ask permission for my co-counsel to publish what has been pre-admitted per the pretrial order as Exhibit 21. Mr. Olson, if we could please go ahead and pull that up. So, Ms. Saracen, you mentioned that you had soccer practice on September 7th of 2018. About what time did that practice start?
Around 3:15.
All right, Mr. Olson, if we could please scroll down on there to get to that 3 to 4 o'clock time. Now, Ms. Saracen, without referring to what's on your screen, just how did the temperature feel to you on that day?
It was super hot. I mean, it's August, September in Texas is always the worst.
All right, thank you, Mr. Olson. We can take that down. So, how was Rory looking to you during this practice?
She looked kind of pale. She didn't really look like herself. She was definitely struggling a little bit.
And what were you doing during this practice?
I was running Burma.
All right, and do you remember about how long you had been running Burma Road?
Probably 15 minutes or so.
And where was Rory when you first started running Burma Road?
She was playing in the scrimmage.
Were you ever closer to Rory at any point?
When she started running Burma with me.
And do you know why Rory was sent to run Burma Road with you?
I think she was missing some goals or something. I don't know. I heard coach yelling at her that she wasn't doing very well. And I remember the coach sending her over to Burma with me.
All right, so when Rory Street is closer to you on Burma Road, what were you seeing then as she was running these drills with you?
She was looking really pale and like she might pass out or something.
And did she make any statement to you about her physical or mental condition she was experiencing as you two were running?
Yeah, she just said she felt kind of funny and that her chest was hurting.
So what happened as you two were running these drills?
So she kept running with me, and then after a while, coach, I don't know why, she was picking on her or something, but at some point she pulled her back over to do a slide tackle drill.
Would you please tell us a little bit about this slide tackle drill?
Sure. So coach had people line up, and Rory would have to basically dribble the ball a few yards, and then someone would come in and slide tackle, which it's not like a football tackle where you go at the person, you actually just go at the ball with your feet, but a lot of the time you do end up knocking over the person.
And did that ever happen to Rory during this drill?
Yeah, every time.
And so what was Rory looking like during this drill?
I just remember she looked like she was like a zombie, like she was lifeless and just not herself, and looked very pale.
Now, I hear you mention slide tackle. You seem to be very familiar with it. Have you ever seen this drill before?
Not this particular drill, no.
Had in all your years of soccer practice, you ever seen this used as a disciplinary measure at all?
No, it seemed kind of extreme that coach would make her do that after running Burma, especially.
All right, so you mentioned Coach Taylor. Where was Coach Taylor when this drill was happening?
She was on the practice field.
And what was she doing?
She kept pulling Rory up every time she would fall down and make her run again.
And about how long did this go on for?
I think like 15 times or so, 15 tackles.
What happened after that 15th tackle?
So after the 15th, Rory fell again to the ground, like she had every time. And I'm sorry, this is kind of hard for me to talk about, but she started convulsing and she started moaning, and it looked like she was having some sort of seizure. And Miss Merriweather, our trainer, called an ambulance, but the ambulance didn't get there in time. And so after a while, she just stopped and was dead.
So I'm sorry, I guess you mentioned someone named Miss Merriweather. Who was that?
Our trainer.
And where was Miss Merriweather before calling the ambulance?
She was also on the field with us.
And so when did Coach Taylor ever call for an ambulance?
She didn't.
And when was the next time you saw your friend?
At her funeral.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Good morning, Ms. Saracen.
Morning.
I want to start off with your relationship with Rory. You said that Rory was your really good friend, right?
Yes, one of my best friends.
And you two had played soccer together for most of your life, hadn't you?
That's correct.
And so you knew firsthand just how talented Rory Street was.
Absolutely.
In fact, on your soccer team at Waco High, Rory was considered the star player. Isn't that right?
She was.
And in fact, Rory was at every single practice that you were at,
That's correct.
and every single scrimmage,
That's correct.
and every single game, right?
Yes.
In fact, Rory was so good, he wouldn't be out of position.
Right.
He could easily pass the ball to another player. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Rory typically wasn't a sloppy player either.
No.
And certainly when there was a wide open net with no goalie and no defenders, well, Rory could make that goal, couldn't he? Or she.
Of course.
But Ms. Saracen, if anything had changed from any of that, meaning if Rory wasn't being her normal star player self, you would expect there to be something wrong, wouldn't you?
I mean, like I said, she didn't look like she felt very well that day.
Right. And by that day, you're referring to September 7th, 2018, right?
Correct.
That day, Rory was being sloppy, wasn't she?
She wasn't playing very well.
Right. And that's exactly as you said on direct examination. That's why what you heard, Coach Taylor was yelling at Rory about, correct?
Yes.
And so eventually, when you heard this yelling, you in fact were over running Burma Road, weren't you?
I was.
And so eventually, Coach Taylor sent Rory over to where you were.
Yes.
And before we get into Burma Road, I want to talk about the conditions that you were practicing under. Waco gets hot, right?
Very hot.
And typically your practices are in the afternoon, which is right after school, correct?
Right.
Well, Ms. Saracen, this wasn't the first time that you would practice in over 100-degree heat, correct?
No, it wasn't.
And in fact, excuse me, and most of the time when you were practicing, Rory was also there, correct?
Correct.
And when you're practicing in these kind of conditions, well, you'd want to take a break, wouldn't you?
Yes.
And in fact, Ms. Saracen, you were regularly given breaks by Coach Taylor, correct?
We were, but we didn't have a break between me and Rory running Burma and her slide tackle drill.
And I understand that, Ms. Saracen, but just bringing it back to my question. At a regular practice, Coach Taylor did give you regular breaks, correct?
Normally, yes.
And as you just said, in the time between you guys finished running Burma Road and when you started the slide tackle drill, well, Rory didn't get a break, correct?
No, she didn't.
But you don't know if Rory got a break before then.
I don't remember.
Right. And you, in fact, don't remember if you even got a break that day, correct?
I don't remember that.
So it's possible that you did.
I might have had a drink of water.
Well, but like you just said, you don't remember if you took a break. So it's possible that you actually did. You just can't remember, correct?
I don't remember. I know I didn't before Rory started running that drill.
All right. So let's get back to that drill. So you have Burma Road, and it's you and Rory side by side, correct?
Correct.
And you two, well, you're doing the same exact movements, aren't you?
Yes.
Under the same Waco humidity.
Yes.
And for you, this is just another soccer drill that you had been repeating over and over before Rory showed up, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, you had been doing that for an entire 15 minutes before Rory showed up, right?
Right.
But you'd agree with me, Miss Saracen, you weren't looking pale, were you?
I wasn't.
You weren't hunched over, clutching your chest?
I don't think so. I mean, I was tired, but no.
Right, but you'd agree with me, physical exhaustion is expected from something like Burma Road.
Right, that's the point.
But you'd agree with me also that in the grand scheme of things, you weren't exactly struggling to complete the task.
Right.
But after mere minutes of Rory showing up, you start complaining to you, correct?
Yeah, she didn't feel well.
Right, and as you're alleging, she was struggling to complete Burma Road.
Right.
On direct examination, you said that she looked pale in the face, right?
She did.
And I believe what you also said on direct was that she looked like she was going to pass out, correct?
She didn't look like herself.
So that's a yes to my question. Specifically, she looked like she was going to pass out.
Yes.
I want to be clear about something, Miss Saracen. You were worried for Rory's well-being, weren't you?
Yeah, I guess so.
But you never went and talked to Trainer Merriweather, did you?
No, I mean, usually when we would complain about not feeling well, coach would just make us run harder. So it didn't seem like the right thing to do.
Just bringing you back to my question. You never went and talked to Coach Merriweather, right?
No, I didn't talk to Jess.
And you didn't talk to Coach Taylor, correct?
No.
So let's talk about what Rory did, or rather what Rory didn't do. Rory didn't stop Burma Road, correct?
Correct.
Rory didn't stop to go take a break.
Right.
Rory didn't stop to go get some water.
Right.
As you said, it looked like Rory was going to pass out. He didn't go sit down, right?
No, she didn't.
She. And in fact, Rory never went over to Jess, the trainer.
No, she didn't.
And as far as you know, at that point, Rory had never approached Coach Taylor saying, I think I'm going to pass out.
Right.
The only person that she told she wasn't feeling well was you.
Correct.
So after a while, what you heard was that Coach Taylor was yelling at Rory that she was still goofing off, correct?
Correct.
So she brought Rory right back over to the practice field.
Right.
And as you said earlier, they conducted these slide tackle drills, right?
Yes.
And you'd agree with me, slide tackles are common at practice,
They're pretty common in soccer.
common at scrimmages,
Mhm.
common, excuse me, is that a yes?
Yes.
Common at games.
Yes.
And you'd agree with me, well, generally speaking, slide tackles aren't dangerous.
It's not the point to be dangerous, but they can be if somebody gets hit the wrong way.
Just back to my question, generally speaking, slide tackles aren't dangerous.
Not usually.
And so you would be surprised that someone was conducting a slide tackle drill, right?
No, like I said, that drill was pretty unusual.
Right. Now at this point, when Rory was completing these slide tackle drills, you were 20 to 30 feet away, right?
I was about 20 yards away, yeah.
Because you weren't done running Burma Road drills, correct?
Correct.
And so it's your testimony, Ms. Saracen, that from 20 or so yards away, you could see Rory's face clearly?
I mean, I could see her when she was running Burma with me, and she looked the same.
Okay, so that's a yes to my question, that from 20 yards away, you could see her clearly.
Pretty clearly.
And it's your testimony here that, well, she looked lifeless.
Yes.
She looked pale.
Yes.
She looked sick.
Yes.
Again, you were worried for her well-being.
I was.
What you also saw, Ms. Saracen, is that Rory never stopped to take a break, correct?
Correct.
And you yourself had stopped Burma Road, so you were watching what was happening, right?
Right.
You never saw Rory yell out to Coach Taylor that she couldn't handle it.
Right.
You never saw Rory ask for water or to stop and go get water, right?
Right. But like I said, usually coach would punish us more for doing that. So I see why she didn't.
Objection, Your Honor, non-responsive.
Sustained.
Move to strike everything after yes.
Granted.
Ms. Saracen, you yourself didn't speak to either the coach or the trainer as you were watching these slide tackle drills, right?
Right.
So you never said anything to anyone that day, correct?
That's correct.
But you did speak to someone the next day, didn't you?
Yes.
And that person was a friend of yours who reached out asking what happened to Rory, right?
That's right.
And the way that you described them, or described Rory, Ms. Saracen.
Your Honor, hearsay.
Response?
Your Honor, if I may make an offer of proof.
Can I hear your response before you make an offer of proof?
Yes, Your Honor, absolutely. Specifically, the statements that I'm referring to are statements that are contained within a text message conversation between Ms. Saracen as well as a friend who had reached out to her. And specifically, these statements, if I may make an offer of proof, include her description of what happened that day, where she specifically only says that, well, everything happened so suddenly and it happened out of nowhere. And I'm offering this as inconsistent testimony to what she has described both on direct examination and with me on cross-examination, where she described a rapidly declining Rory as opposed to someone that she's now describing the next day as someone who just suddenly collapsed. So we offer this as inconsistent testimony.
Your Honor, if I may respond.
Briefly, Mr. Meinkoff.
Your Honor, if this would be used as some sort of impeachment or to show conflicting statements, that I don't think is happening here. I think that's improper. This text message simply uses the phrase that seemed to collapse out of nowhere. That response does not directly contradict anything that was said, and that's a general description about the scenario.
Your objection is going to be sustained.
Ms. Saracen, you'd agree with me that as a coach, Coach Taylor's job is to get you guys to get better at soccer, right?
Yes.
Well, And that requires Coach Taylor to look out for you, right?
Right.
But it requires you as the athlete to also look out for yourself, correct?
Yes.
You're expected to listen to your coach, aren't you?
Yes.
You're expected that if you don't feel well, you should stop, right?
Sure.
And most importantly, Ms. Saracen, you're expected to show up to practice clean and sober, correct? I'm sorry, is it yes?
Yes.
Thank you. Pass the witness.
You're direct, Mr. Minkoff.
Yes, Your Honor.
You can proceed when you're ready.
Ms. Saracen, you spoke briefly during cross-examination about how you would run all of these practices and drills with Rory frequently. How often had you performed that slide tackling drill at the end?
That was one that Coach came up with that day.
And how many, you also mentioned during cross-examination that you would sometimes get breaks during regular practices. About how many breaks would you usually get at a normal practice?
Probably one or two, depending on what we were doing that day.
And how many breaks do you remember having on this practice?
I don't remember any breaks.
Any further questions, Your Honor?
Any recross?
No, Your Honor.
Ms. Saracen, you can step down then. Mr. Minkoff, call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, my co-counsel and I would read in portions of the Jordan Street deposition. Jordan Street is an unavailable witness in today's case.
Very well.
And Mr. Olson, if you would please display the transcript with the highlighted portions we'll be reading on the screen for everyone's convenience.
Yes, one moment, sorry.
May I proceed?
You may.
Page 2, line 6. Good morning. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Jordan Street.
Page 2, line 15. Do you have any children?
I did. My daughter, Rory.
Page 3, line 1. Were you there at practice that day?
No, I was at work.
Page 3, line 7. Given that you didn't have any knowledge what happened that day on the practice field, let's focus on Rory. How old was Rory at the time of her death?
18 years old.
Was Rory in high school?
Yes.
Where did she go to school?
Rory went to Waco High, just like me.
Did Rory participate in any sports?
Yes, she played varsity soccer for the school. She also played soccer for private traveling club teams on the weekends. To be honest, that kid's life was pretty much soccer 24/7. Getting her to read a book was the hard part.
When did Rory start playing soccer?
Oh gosh, when she was little, 4 or 5 years old, I went and signed her up and to get her started with being out and being athletic and being around other kids. But she took right to it and never looked back. Before you knew it, we were spending weekends driving all over Texas to soccer tournaments. And the next 12 or so years were just kind of a blur. Soccer tournaments, soccer practices, soccer camps, soccer everything.
Was Rory good?
Oh, Rory was a superb athlete. She had gotten several scholarship offers from Division I programs to play soccer in college. Southern Methodist University, Dallas Baptist University, Austin College, and the University of Texas at Dallas. They'd all offered her a scholarship.
Page 4, line 14. Was soccer something the two of you shared?
You know, I played soccer in college, so I already loved the game, but I didn't care what the sport was. I just loved having a kid that was into sports of any kind. I loved getting up on the weekends when she was little to go kick the ball in the backyard and let her to try dribble it past me. I love talking about games and strategy. It brought back so many memories of my playing days, but this was even better because it was my kid and it made her so happy. By the time Rory was in high school, we even had a favorite team, West Ham United, that we would root on together every weekend during the English Premier League season. We loved going to T-Bones to watch the matches.
Page 6, line 12. Did she use drugs?
Absolutely not. If I had suspected that or seen any evidence of that, then there would have been serious consequences. Whenever Rory acted up in the past, even just threats of grounding and chores around the house proved to be effective deterrents.
Objection, Your Honor. Lacks personal knowledge and speculation. As to the answer that was just read.
Response, Mr. Minkoff.
Your Honor, this is Rory Street's mother. If there had ever been any circumstances where Rory was found to be using drugs, she would certainly have personal knowledge of that, especially considering that this was a high school student.
Your Honor, if I may.
Briefly.
Yes, Your Honor. Although Ms. Street is obviously Rory Street's mother, that doesn't necessarily mean that she can say whether or not her daughter was experimenting with drugs. She can certainly say, as far as I've seen, I've never seen her do drugs in front of me, but to definitively say that she has in fact never done drugs, when we do, if I may make an offer of proof, have a toxicology report that will say that she had cocaine in her system on September 7th, 2018, would be a lack of personal knowledge and would be speculation.
Overruled. I think if the toxicology report is something that you want to address, you can bring it in on cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor.
Page 6, line 18. Was Rory a discipline problem?
No, not any more than other kids that age. I mean, she was a little wild and liked to have fun, but she wasn't some hippie smoking dope behind the school or some party animal who stayed out all night. Rory got in trouble a few times and I got called by the principal a few times, but it was just normal teenager stuff. Being late to class, goofing around, or missing some homework assignments.
Page 7, line 8. Did Rory regularly visit her pediatrician?
At least once a year for a physical.
During any of those yearly physicals, were there any issues?
None. Rory had never had any serious medical issues, just normal kid stuff.
Page 7, line 19. When you were playing soccer at Waco High, did you ever have to run Burma Road?
Hell yeah, we did. I remember doing that when we were dogging it or if we weren't in the correct position or something.
Mr. Olson, would you pause while Ms. Leidy gets her lights back on?
I'm sorry about that.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
I'm ready. I'm sorry.
Continue.
Page 7, line 19. When you were playing soccer at Waco High, did you ever have to run Burma Road?
Hell yeah, we did. I remember doing that when we were dogging it or if we weren't in the correct position or something. Coach would send us off to run Burma Road.
Page 9, line 3. Is it important to teach slide tackling as a coach?
Yes, it is, but that isn't what happened here. This wasn't a drill to teach Rory how to slide tackle or defend against them. Rory knew how to slide tackle and how to avoid them. This was about punishment. Coach Taylor lost his temper and went to...
Mr. Olson, I think there's an objection.
But sorry, I'm just...
Ms. Leidy?
Objection, improper opinion as to, and speculation as to specifically, this was about punishment. Referring to the slide tackle drill.
Mr. Minkoff?
Your Honor, as was previously read in, this witness has had lots of experience with soccer practices, both as a soccer player herself and with her daughter. She would certainly be aware of her daughter's abilities and how a normal slide tackling drill would be implemented and whether or not this was one of them.
Ms. Leidy, I'm going to overrule the objection. We're going to have Coach Taylor on the stand later today, and I think we'll be able to understand what she was intending to do with this drill when she gets here.
Yes, Your Honor.
Page 9, line 3. Is it important to teach slide tackling as a coach?
Yes, it is, but that isn't what happened here. This wasn't a drill to teach Rory how to slide tackle or defend against them. Rory knew how to slide tackle and how to avoid them. This was about punishment. Coach Taylor lost his temper and went too far. That drill wasn't necessary. And all the time that I played, coached, and watched soccer, I've never seen a drill like that, not once.
Did you have any part in Coach Taylor being hired?
Yes, I was instrumental in getting Coach Taylor hired. Wish I hadn't been, but I was.
Why did you want Coach Taylor?
We wanted a winning coach. I wanted Rory to be coached by a winner. That's what we wanted. And we thought that Coach Taylor was the right person for the job. Looking back now is obviously a huge mistake on my part.
No further readings for this witness, Your Honor.
Ms. Leidy, do you have any cross-examination you'd like to read into the record?
No, Your Honor.
Plaintiff, you can call your next witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff would rest their case in chief with the understanding that we may read in portions of the transcript of Ms. Jess Merriweather should the defense choose not to call that expert, if we may.
Yes, sir. I'm going to briefly update the timesheets. I will give you an update on where you are, and we will proceed with the defense case in chief at 12:35.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Are both parties ready to proceed with the defense case?
Yes, Your Honor.
Anything we need to take up before the defense starts?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. For the plaintiff, we have 29 minutes, 22 seconds remaining. For the defense, 31 minutes, 53 seconds. Defense, you can call your first witness whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, we'd like to call Coach Reese Taylor. May I proceed, Your Honor?
Okay.
Good morning. Could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Reese Taylor.
What do you do for a living?
Well, I'm a health teacher at Waco High, but I also coach the varsity soccer team there.
Do you have any sort of educational background in coaching or being a teacher?
Yeah, I've actually been coaching sports for about 26 years on the high school level. I also went to A&M and got my degree in physical education. So it's pretty much all I've done.
Well, Coach Taylor, how exactly would you describe your experience with sports?
It's been great. I basically coached any sport that you could play. I've done it all. It's been great. I always knew that I wanted to be a health teacher. That's what I went to A&M to do. I knew that's what I wanted to get my degree in. And then I knew I wanted to be coaching on the high school level so that I could influence those children's lives.
Do you have any sort of specialization or training?
Yeah, I got my degree in physical education.
Do you ever attend conferences or lectures about how to coach and how to implement the best practices?
Yes, I regularly attend several conferences a year to keep up with best practices and see what other coaches around the state and country are thinking so that I make sure that I'm doing what's right for my players.
Now, you said that you've coached a number of sports, but is one of those sports soccer?
Yeah, soccer is definitely my favorite sport to coach.
And where exactly do you coach soccer at?
I coach at Waco High, which is actually my alma mater.
Well, Coach Taylor, are you familiar with Rory Street?
I am.
Do you understand why you're here today?
Yeah, Rory, it's really unfortunate what happened to her, and yes.
And before we get into exactly what happened on September 7th, 2018, I'd like to talk a little bit about your relationship with Rory.
Okay.
How well did you know Rory?
I knew Rory really well. The kids on that varsity team are like my own children, and Rory was one of the best players on the team. It was an honor to coach her. I mean, I knew her pretty well.
And how would you describe Rory in comparison to the rest of her teammates?
She was really talented. Sometimes I even thought that she was kind of superhuman in her ability to just pick up any skill, especially just in soccer. She had a really bright future, and that's why it's just so devastating what happened.
Well, you just said that Rory Street had a really bright future. Did you feel as though Rory was always living up to her potential at practice?
No. While Rory was very talented and had awesome athletic skills, it sometimes was hard to keep her focus. She wasn't always the best at keeping attention or doing what she was supposed to be doing during practice, and sometimes that could cause her to have an off day.
What about on September 7th, 2018? What was Rory like that day?
Yeah, that day was especially bad. Rory came to practice and she was just goofing off. She wasn't even in the position she was supposed to be at all times. She was missing passes, missing shots, just wasn't at all playing up to her abilities.
Well, before we talk about exactly what you made Rory do, let's talk about the setting. What time of day was it that you were running this practice?
Well, we have all of our practices around 3:15, 3:30 because the athletes have school during the day, and it's just good for them to play in the afternoon because it's hot and it helps with conditioning, and their games are all outside. It's typically hot in Texas. So we started around, I think, 3:30 that day.
And just to be clear, Coach Taylor, had you ever had any issue with Rory suffering from heat exhaustion or heat stroke before?
No, absolutely not.
Had you ever experienced anybody suffering from heat exhaustion or heat stroke during a practice in a practice with these kind of temperatures?
I mean, kids get hot, they have to go get water, which is why we have it readily available on the sidelines at all times, but nothing extraordinary now.
And you just mentioned water breaks. Do you allow your players to have breaks in general during your practice?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a trainer that at any time, if they're feeling fatigued, they can go see. Like I said, water is always available on the sidelines for the athletes. The kids know that if they want water, they can go get it.
All right, that brings us back to Rory. So you said on September 7th, 2018, that Rory was having some difficulty focusing and paying attention.
Yeah, she was goofing off, just not really living up to her full potential. And I was really worried about this because it was a scrimmage day, which is as close to a real game as possible. And if Rory wasn't playing up to her full potential in a game, then she's not going to get those D1 scholarships that I know that she was capable of earning.
Well, what exactly did you do with Rory?
Well, what we do to any athlete who is not necessarily paying attention or is kind of goofing off and may need some discipline to get them back into the practice is we send them to Burma Road.
Can you describe for us exactly what Burma Road is?
Sure. Burma Road's a tradition at Waco High. I even participated in it when I went there in the 90s. Several of the kids' parents have participated in it. It's been around for a long time. And basically it's just when the athletes have a hard time focusing or aren't doing well, we have them go over, they run, dribble, fire a shot at an open goal. And then they bear call back to the beginning and do it again.
Well, generally speaking, is running Burma Road drills a safe thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it entails everything that a soccer game entails. Running, dribbling, shooting, conditioning exercises, it's normal.
So you just told us that you had sent Rory over to run these Burma Road drills. In your opinion, how was Rory performing?
Well, when she was on Burma Road, she was still just goofing off and not paying attention. And she was just still not doing well and not living up to her potential. So it just really wasn't working for her that day.
Now, to be clear, from what you could see of Rory, when Rory was performing these Burma Road drills, did Rory look pale to you?
No, not at all. And I didn't notice something and the trainer didn't notice anything. And she wasn't sweating or anything any more than any of the other athletes.
And Coach Taylor, if you had seen those kind of signs, what would you have done?
I would have pulled her, told her to get a drink of water, take a break, or called the trainer. I mean, that's what we do. I've been coaching for 26 years. Athletes get injured, athletes get sick. It happens all the time. I've had to pull athletes several times. Are
your team members required to request a water break or a break in general from you?
No, absolutely not.
All right. So when you saw that Rory was goofing off and fumbling around a Burma Road drill, what exactly did you do?
Well, I mean, these are like my own kids. And when I just saw her just not in her typical zone that day, I decided that she needed another disciplinary drill of some sort to get her back in the game again so that she could perform on her full level.
So what drill specifically did you have her perform?
Well, I decided that we would work on slide tackles for the whole team and that it would help Rory be a little more disciplined. So we did a slide tackle drill.
Now, Coach Taylor, you've been here throughout this trial the entire time, right?
Yes,
So you were here when Aubrey Saracen was testifying earlier?
I was.
Excuse me, specifically, you were here when opposing counsel read in part of the deposition of Rory's mom, Jordan Street, right?
I was.
You heard both of them describe this slide tackle drill as a punishment. Is that how you would characterize it?
Absolutely not. I don't have any reason to be punishing my players. As a coach, my goal is for them to perform to the fullest of their ability so that they can get the best out of their experience on the team. The goal was to prepare Rory to receive slide tackles in the game, to help teammates slide tackle, and obviously to discipline her because, like I said, she was not participating in practice the way that she should have been.
Had you ever done this kind of a drill before?
This exact drill we hadn't done, but if an athlete is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, it's common to do these types of drills.
And just so we're clear about how slide tackles work, are they inherently dangerous?
A lot of parts of sports can be dangerous if they're done incorrectly, but the purpose is for the opponent to go for the ball. So if they're done correctly, which these are varsity athletes, so they normally are, then it shouldn't be dangerous.
And is it common for when a slide tackle is performed for the person with the ball to fall to the ground?
It can happen.
So in this case, how exactly did this drill play out with Rory?
So basically I would blow the whistle, and when I blow the whistle, one person in line, while Rory would dribble, would slide tackle to attempt to take the ball from Rory. That's how it played out.
How many times did you have Rory repeat this process?
It was probably 14 or 15 times.
Now again, you were here in court today when Aubrey Saracen testified that every single time that someone came at Rory and she fell, you walked over and you yanked her up by her jersey and told her, get back in position and do it again. Did you say that and do that?
No, I would help her up if she needed help up, but at no point did I yank her by her jersey. That's just, I was helping her get up.
And about how far away would you say you were from Rory as she was completing these drills?
About 20 feet.
From where you were standing, Coach Taylor, did it appear to you that Rory was struggling at all?
No, not any more than an athlete of her caliber would be struggling during a tough drill. It wasn't a struggle in a way that it made me think that she needed help or that she wasn't okay.
Coach Taylor, if you had seen the signs that Rory was in distress, what would you have done?
Well, that's exactly why we have a trainer at practice, is for me to be able to say we have an athlete struggling who needs attention. If she had been struggling in a way that was noticeable to me or any of the players or the trainer, then she would have received help immediately.
And just so we're clear, at any point during that practice on September 7th, 2018, did Rory ever ask you if she could stop or take a break?
No.
And as far as you know, did she ever ask Jess Merriweather, your trainer, if she could stop or take a break?
No, she didn't.
So Coach, what exactly happened at the end of that 15th drill?
Unfortunately, Rory went to the ground, and that's when obviously the ambulance was called, and unfortunately that's when the terrible accident happened.
Coach Taylor, you were here when Aubrey Saracen made it important to point out that it wasn't you that called the ambulance. Can you explain why that was?
Well, I wouldn't be the one who would call the ambulance. That's why the trainer is there. I am a health teacher. I have a degree in physical education, but the trainer is specifically meant to give health aid to the athletes, and it makes the most sense for her to call the ambulance and for me to be with the players during a situation like that.
So during this time, were you next to Rory?
Yes, I was.
Were you taking care of Rory?
As much as I could, yes.
Coach, do you feel responsible at all for Rory's death?
I don't feel responsible for Rory's death, but I do feel awful about it. I think knowing what we know now, I wish that she hadn't come to practice that day, but there's nothing I can do about that. I was running practice the way I had for 26 years of coaching. And I don't think that there's anything that any of us there could have done that day to prevent what happened from happening.
And just so we're clear about a couple more things, did you know that on September 7th, 2018, Rory had arrived to practice with cocaine in her system?
Of course not. If I ever knew that one of my high school student athletes came to a rigorous practice like we have under the influence of cocaine, I wouldn't have allowed them to be there.
Thank you. Pass the witness.
Mr. Meinkoff, you can proceed with your cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Coach Taylor, let's just clear something up real fast. On September 7th, 2018, early on in that practice, you noticed something was different about Rory.
Yeah, what was different about her was the way she was playing and how she was focusing.
And specifically about the way she was playing, you described it as goofing off, right?
Yeah.
And by goofing off, you mean she wasn't making goals that she normally would be able to.
She wasn't making goals she would normally make, incomplete passes, not necessarily in the position she's supposed to be in, just not focusing on practice.
You agree with me? There were physical manifestations that something was different.
Not really. It seemed like she was just kind of out of the game. That kind of happened a lot with Rory. She had a hard time paying attention sometimes.
There were manifestations. You saw that she was missing goals she should have been making.
Sure.
Saw that she was struggling to get into position on the field.
Struggling to get into position. Rory knows where to get in position. It wasn't that she wasn't physically capable of it. It's that she was kind of aloof and not doing it that day.
All right. And as a coach for over 26 years now, you said, right?
Yes.
You've been coaching at Waco High for 6 of those years, right?
I have.
And you're trained to notice differences like this.
Well, I'm trained to teach high school sports. In my experiences, I have noticed that occasionally teenage athletes have a hard time paying attention if they're distracted by other things.
Well, that's something you've mentioned a couple times now, that Rory would often have a little trouble paying attention, but Rory had never been a discipline problem like this before, right?
Not necessarily like this, but like I said, pretty much everyone at the team at some point had done Burma Road. Even Rory had done it before, because anytime that one of the athletes did have a hard time paying attention, that was kind of our go-to.
So to direct you back to my question, before we get to Burma Road, this was an unusual problem for Rory.
It was an unusual problem for Rory, but it wasn't an unusual problem for athletes her age.
All right. Now, you mentioned that, you train to kind of look for when these players aren't performing up to their maximum potential, right?
I'm trained to know when an athlete isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing in practice.
Yeah, that's part of what makes you a good coach.
I think so.
Another thing that, as you mentioned, on direct makes you a good coach is you keep up with modern practices.
Yeah, I try to keep up with best practices for sure.
You attend seminars and meetings.
Yeah, I attend a few conferences every year.
Well, I'd like to talk about some information that was covered at one of those meetings. I would like you to look at Exhibit 11, please.
Okay. Sorry, give me a second to pull that up. Okay, I've got it.
Now, you recognize Exhibit 11 to be slides from a presentation given during the annual meeting of the Texas High School Soccer Coaches Association.
I do.
And you actually attended that meeting yourself.
I did.
And this is a true and correct copy of the slides that were shown on that day?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to enter Exhibit 11 into evidence.
Any response, Ms. Slidey?
Yes, Your Honor. Hearsay?
Mr. Meinkoff?
Your Honor, these slides would be offered for the effect that they had on the listener, specifically Coach Taylor this day, namely that this annual meeting for high school coaches presented information about certain safety precautions that should be taken in high temperature scenarios, and that those recommendations and those instructions, were something that Coach Taylor would be aware of as an ordinary person looking after the care of, their students. They would have been able to foresee the dangers associated with this practice.
Ms. Slidey?
Your Honor, I'm fine with it being used for that purpose so long as it's not to suggest that these are in fact the standard by which to gauge negligence for.
Mr. Minkoff, are you okay with that?
Your Honor, I certainly understand this is not a negligence per se case. This is merely to show what this witness was aware of.
Very well. We'll go with that. I'm going to overrule your objection, but feel free to re-urge it if he goes outside the bounds of what we just discussed.
Yes, Your Honor.
Your Honor, permission for my co-counsel to publish those slides.
Yes, you may, and the exhibit is admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Coach Taylor, looking at this first slide here, this was, the slide reads that it was on June 15th of 2018.
Yes.
All right, now, Mr. Olson, if we could turn to that second slide.
Okay.
Now, on this second slide here, you see some recommendations. Specifically, it recommends that where possible, breaks should be in the shade, right?
Right, that's what it says.
Now, it's my understanding that there wasn't shade on September the 7th. Is that right?
No, we didn't do that at the time.
But as head coach, you had the power, you had the ability to make shade for these players, right?
Sure.
All right. So, Ms. Taylor, looking at that second slide, there's a heading for temperatures above 96 degrees, right?
Yes.
Which says that there must be 5-minute breaks every 30 minutes.
Yes.
So that would be 2 breaks in an hour-long practice.
Yes.
And that next heading is for when the temperature is hotter at 100 degrees or more, right?
Yes.
This slide says there must be a break every 15 minutes,
That's correct.
meaning that for every hour of practice, there should be 4 separate breaks.
That's correct.
So a practice lasting 2 hours, you would need to have 8 separate breaks, right?
Right, if you're following this recommendation.
And as head coach, it would be possible for you to call those breaks during your practices.
Sure.
But you did not call 8 separate breaks that day.
No, like I said, the water's on the sidelines and the athletes know that they can go retrieve water anytime they need it.
All right. Well, to be clear, though, you never specifically called, and I understand that you had water provided, but you'll agree with me that that's a separate point on this slide, right? Water must be provided.
Yes, it is a separate point on this slide.
Entirely separate from those breaks being called.
Yes.
Right, thank you, Mr. Olson. We can put down the slide and we'll wait just a minute.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to now discuss what was happening to Rory Street while this practice was happening and these breaks weren't being called.
Okay.
You began your practice at around 3:15 that day, right?
Yeah, around there.
As you mentioned on direct, one of the advantages to starting at that time was to expose your students to the heat.
It's one of the reasons, yeah.
And as we mentioned, you noticed that Rory there was something different.
Yeah, she definitely wasn't playing to her full ability that day.
And because she wasn't playing to her full ability, you sent her to run Burma Road, right?
Yes, it's a tradition.
And now at Burma Road, you also believe that she was goofing off.
Yeah, she was definitely still goofing off. She wasn't paying attention. She still was missing shots. It really just wasn't having any effect on her that day.
Now, I want to be clear because on direct, you mentioned that Burma Road, consists of everything you would expect to see in a soccer game, right?
Yeah.
But part of Burma Road is bear crawling on the ground back to the starting position, right?
Yeah.
And as part of Burma Road, you repeat this until the coach tells you to stop.
Right.
And to my knowledge, bear crawling on the ground, that's not part of a regular soccer game, right?
Of course not. What I meant is that conditioning and being conditioned for a soccer game is important. And that to be prepared for a soccer game, you have to be conditioned, and bear crawling is a very common way to condition athletes.
Now, and as Rory Street's running Burma Road, you notice she's lagging behind.
Yeah, she was just still goofing off, still kind of just not really being herself.
Well, talking about goofing off, what we're talking about here is performing lesser than usual, right?
Yeah, not paying attention, not using her skills to her full ability.
So Rory's not cracking jokes with her teammates.
I was far away. I mean, there was other teammates running Burma Road, so potentially, but not that I saw.
You didn't see her cracking jokes to any of her teammates.
No, I didn't see that.
You didn't see any of her teammates laughing at her.
Not that I saw.
All right, so what you do see though is that she's not performing as much as she usually does.
Yeah, she seemed distracted, just really wasn't in practice that day.
So then you asked her to come over back to the scrimmage line, and this is when you performed that slide tackling drill.
That's when I implemented the slide tackle drill.
I want to talk about that slide tackling drill for just a moment, because on direct you mentioned that this wasn't a punishment, but you did call it a disciplinary action.
Yeah.
So the point of this wasn't to train Rory more about this particular drill, right?
It had that effect on the whole team. They were practicing slide tackling. Rory was getting more experience with that, but it also had the benefit of disciplining Rory.
And in fact, another benefit was that slide tacklings are physical actions, right? Physical contact.
Most of soccer is physical.
But specifically this slide tackle, that's a physical contact thing.
Like most parts of soccer.
And that physical contact is why you wanted to run this particular drill.
I wanted to run that particular drill because it's hard. Slide tackles are a hard but common part of soccer. And it seemed like a good way to get Rory's head in the game.
So you wanted to run this hard slide tackling drill, but this was actually the first time this drill had ever been run before, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I like to keep up with best practices. I attend conferences to get new ideas. I mean, as a coach who's been going for 26 years, you're going to make new drills.
And so this was the first time you'd had 14 to 15 players line up one after the other, charge at Miss Street, right?
Well, I wouldn't say charge, but I had them slide tackle.
And this was the first time you'd had this slide tackle maneuver performed repeatedly.
It was the first time in the specific drill that had been done.
In fact, during this drill, you noticed that Rory was struggling.
Yeah, I mean, it was a tough drill. She's a great athlete, but I mean, she had been doing drills, so she was struggling like an athlete would in a tough drill.
And this is immediately after she had just been running sprints on Burma Road.
This was right after.
And you mentioned a couple times, I understand you don't want to say that you were yanking Miss Street off the ground, but you said on direct that you helped her off the ground, right?
Are you implying that I yanked on her jersey?
Not at all. I'm simply asking, you helped, as you said on direct, Miss Street off the ground.
Yes, I would help her up if she fell to the ground.
So there were times when Rory needed help getting up.
Right. Like I think it's been said a few times today, sometimes in a slide tackle, if it's done incorrectly, the player can fall to the ground.
I understand that, but when Miss Street fell to the ground, as you mentioned on direct, you needed to help her up.
Yes, I would help her up.
Now, looking back on this, you wouldn't have done anything differently, right?
I don't know what I could have done differently. From my knowledge, as someone who's been coaching for 26 years, in my experience coaching this exact same way, I've never had anything like this happen. I don't know how I could have known to do something differently.
You mentioned you had seen Rory performing not up to standard throughout the entire practice.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that on direct, it was actually Miss Merriweather who called the ambulance, right?
It was. That's her job.
And you are right next to Rory when she collapses to the ground.
I went over to her, yes.
And you never called the ambulance.
Well, like I said, I was with the players. Miss Merriweather was just as close as me. We were all there. So yes, she called the ambulance.
And I believe in your words that while Rory was struggling on the ground, it was not your job to call the ambulance.
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered.
Your Honor, if I may respond.
Briefly.
Your Honor, this witness has testified that they weren't the one to call the ambulance, but not that they didn't assign that as their role, as their personal job. They believed that that was someone else's responsibility.
Sustained.
Can you re-ask the question?
I believe the objection was sustained, so I would re-ask. So it was Miss Merriweather who ran over and called the ambulance?
Miss Merriweather called the ambulance as soon as she could.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Coach Taylor, opposing counsel spent a lot of time on the fact that this slide tackle drill was a new one. Can you explain to us exactly why you implemented a new drill on this specific day against Rory?
I wanted her to get into the practice. I wanted to discipline her. She was distracting the practice and not doing her role, and it seemed important to make sure that she was disciplined. And like I said, I implement new drills all the time.
And did you feel as though this new slide tackle drill was a safe one?
Absolutely. I have no reason to want my players on my team to be participating in an unsafe drill.
And you mentioned that at times you had to walk over and help Rory up. At any of those times, did you feel as though she couldn't handle what the drill was asking of her?
No, and I just didn't have any reason to believe that Rory would be uncomfortable telling me that she needed help when I was right there.
Thank you. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Any recross?
No, Your Honor.
Coach Taylor, you can step down. Miss Miss Lighty, call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, with the help of my co-counsel, Mr. White, I'd like to read in several portions of Jess Merriweather's deposition testimony.
Very well.
All right, starting with page 2, lines 8 and 9. Oh, excuse me, lines 6 through 8. Good morning. Would you please state your name for the record?
Hello there. My name is Jess Merriweather.
All right, Mr. White, and for the court's reference, if we can move over to page 5 at the bottom. I'm sorry. One moment, Your Honor, I apologize. Excuse me, page 4, lines starting at line 4. Have you worked with Coach Taylor?
I have,
In what capacity?
as a trainer. So I've attended soccer practices and soccer games where Coach Taylor was the coach. I've worked with Coach Taylor in order to treat injured players. And I've worked with Coach Taylor just overseeing the students during practices and games.
Do you have any role in designing drills for practices?
No, that is all Coach Taylor.
Do you have any role in disciplining players?
No, that is all Coach Taylor as well. I'm certainly there overseeing any on-field discipline that takes place, but I'm not directing that discipline or deciding who should be disciplined.
All right, moving on to the bottom of page 5, line 24. Was Rory a good student? And continuing on to the top of page 6.
She was smart, if that's what you're asking, but I wouldn't call her a good student.
Why not?
Rory was always a discipline problem. It seemed like she thought she could do whatever she wanted to do because she was a star athlete. And the worst part is that nothing faced her. You could send Rory to the principal's office all day long, but she didn't care because that was just an excuse to get out of class. The only discipline I ever saw work on Rory was Coach Taylor's discipline.
Moving on to page 8, starting at line 18. At any time, did you see Rory stumbling, faltering, or slowing down in a way that would have indicated she was in trouble?
No, not at all.
Was Rory sweating hard?
I mean, yes, but everyone was, including me. It was a really hot day.
And continuing on to page 9, starting at line 1, lines 1 through 3. Did Rory ever say anything to you about feeling bad that day?
No, never said anything to me. And here's the thing. I'm there to take care of those players, and they know it.
Thank you. Your Honor, at this time, I have nothing further. But I would request with the court's, I apologize.
Go ahead.
I would request with the court's permission a brief recess to prepare for closing arguments.
Mr. Michael has the cross-examination first.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Minkoff, you can proceed when you'd like, when you're ready.
Certainly, Your Honor. Mr. Olson, again, if you would please pull this up with the highlighted portions for the court's convenience. And Your Honor, just so you're aware, I am going to try to not repeat things that were said before, so there may be highlighted portions that I am moving past. All right. Turning to page 8, line 10. Did you see Rory running Burma Road?
I saw Rory over on Burma Road, but I wasn't watching her closely.
Mr. Olson, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Page 8, line 10. Did you see Rory running Burma Road?
I saw Rory over on Burma Road, but I wasn't watching her closely.
Did you see Rory during the slide tackling drill?
Again, I saw that it was happening, and I certainly saw parts of it, but I didn't watch it closely.
What were you doing while all of this was going on?
I was taping another student's ankle about 40 yards away.
Page 8, line 22. Was Rory sweating hard?
I mean, yes, but everyone was, including me. It was a really hot day.
Page 9, line 9. Are players allowed to get water when they want it?
Yes, all they have to do is ask, even if we're not on a water break.
You said it was hot. What can players do to get out of the heat?
We have tents set up with water and Gatorade now.
Your Honor, this is a subsequent remedial measure.
Response?
Your Honor, I'm not offering this as a subsequent remedial measure to prove negligence. Rather, what we heard today was that there was no shade that day and that this was something that was recommended in those practices, those slides that we saw. And this would be going to show the feasibility of adding more shade. This was not something that was completely precluded from Coach Taylor's ability.
Sustained.
Your Honor, move to strike the response that was provided.
Granted.
Page 10, line 6. Do you still work at Waco High?
Yeah, I got promoted to head trainer about 2 months ago, so it's going great.
Do you still work with Coach Taylor?
Of course I do. I work with all the coaches, Coach Taylor included. In fact, Coach Taylor is the one that wrote me the recommendation letter for the promotion to head trainer. Again, Coach Taylor has a lot of faith in me and my abilities, and I just want to try to impress him or her.
We have no further readings from this witness.
Ms. Leidy, anything further from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
Do we have anything we need to take up before we take a brief break for me to tally up the time, and then we'll proceed to closing argument?
Nothing from the defense, Your Honor.
Nothing from the plaintiff, Your Honor.
All right, then we will start closing arguments at 1:15.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, are the parties ready to proceed with closing argument?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, for the plaintiff, I have 16 minutes, 29 seconds remaining. For the defense, 16 minutes, 18 seconds.
And Your Honor, I would just ask to reserve any remaining time I have at the end of my closing argument for rebuttal.
Granted.
Thank you.
Mr. Minkoff, you can proceed when you're ready.
Something was different with Rory that day. That's something we've heard over and over again. We heard it from Aubrey Saracen, Rory's best friend, who noticed that Rory wasn't performing at the top of her game. She was starting to look fatigued and sweaty. She was complaining about chest pains. We even heard it from Coach Taylor, the defendant. From the very moment that this started, saw that something was different with Rory. Saw that Rory was having trouble getting into positioning on field, missing obvious goals that a star athlete like this wouldn't normally miss. Now, Coach Taylor wants to blame this on an attitude problem, on goofing off. But I didn't hear anything today about Rory making jokes or cracking wise with her fellow classmates. And in fact, Rory was subjected to several layers of discipline. Rory was sent to Burma Road to run drills where she was still falling behind. And then she was sent to this new, first time ever seen before, slide tackling drill, again for discipline. What you heard today from Miss Merriweather was that you normally wouldn't take this much. Rory Street usually responded really well to Coach Taylor and Coach Taylor's discipline. In fact, you heard from Coach Taylor as well that this player acting like this, that was unusual. And not only was it unusual for Rory, it was unusual for the other players as well. You heard today during Aubrey Saracen's cross-exam that she was running Burma Road with Rory that day. She wasn't feeling as fatigued. She didn't have heart problems. She wasn't looking as flushed. Something was obviously different and obviously concerning about Rory Street's condition that day. You have in front of you reports from an expert doctor by the name of McConaughey. These expert reports detail out specific symptoms of heat exhaustion. I'm going to show those to you on the screen. We heard today about many of these symptoms that Rory was demonstrating today. First, we heard from Coach Taylor, who from the very beginning of practice noticed that Rory was having trouble keeping up. She was moving slower than normal. Members of the jury, that's fatigue. That she was having trouble finding her position on field, a position that she should normally know to go to, but wasn't getting there yet. That's confusion, that's disorientation. You heard from Aubrey Saracen that when Rory Street was near her, she looked very pale. That she was complaining, groaning on the ground from pains. That she was talking about chest problems. You heard today that when that slide tackling began, Rory would fall to the ground, as Aubrey Saracen described it, getting yanked back up, as Coach Taylor described it, needing help up, still unable to get off the ground herself. That's weakness. And we heard that after that 15th repeated slide tackle, Rory Street collapsed and began convulsing. Those are seizures. How do we know about all of these symptoms? We know about all of these symptoms because witnesses who saw them came here today and told you about them. Now, Coach Taylor may want to blame all of this on, well, it wasn't her job. It wasn't her job to call the ambulance. You know, how could I have possibly known that this student had cocaine in her system? But whether or not that student had cocaine in their system, and we can see there was cocaine in Rory's system that day, does not excuse this behavior. Coach Taylor saw that something was different, saw that something was unusual, and whether or not the cocaine was playing a role in that, Coach Taylor did not stop for a break, did not ask Rory what was wrong. And when Rory collapsed in front of Coach Taylor, who, remember, said that she was helping Coach Rory off the ground, the person who's right over her as she's suffering these seizures isn't the one who calls an ambulance. She waits for the trainer, Merriweather, who, as you heard from her deposition, was yards away, not really paying attention to what was going on, to run over and call the ambulance. Members of the jury, we had a burden to prove to you today by a preponderance of the evidence. Coach Taylor acted negligently. That Coach Taylor should have foreseen the dangers of running that drill with this student, could have foreseen the risks. What you heard today is that Coach Taylor attended a soccer coaches meet where she was informed about the dangers of performing at hot weather. She heard the recommendations for shade. There's no shade provided on that day. She heard the recommendations about frequent water breaks frequent breaks in playtime. And sure, water was there, but you heard today that on a regular practice, coach maybe calls for a break once. But Aubrey Saracen didn't remember any breaks that day, certainly not the 8 that those slides would encourage her to have. Members of the jury, when a coach sees a player is struggling, and that is unusual for this star athlete, this athlete who is described as superhuman before, someone who was at the top of their game, someone who had never shown a dip in performance to this amount before. When a coach sees that that player is suffering, is slowing down, needs help getting off the ground, that coach is aware that something is wrong, that something is different, that something needs to be done. The ambulance needs to be called. A break needs to be called. But neither of those things were done by Coach Taylor. Rory Street collapsed and died of heat stroke after being exposed to an intense disciplinary training regimen of running on Burma Road repeatedly, and then immediately being brought back over for a first-time demonstration of a repeated slide tackle discipline drill. A drill that involved students running one after the time, sliding into her, colliding with her, knocking her to the ground, and getting back up without any break in between. Rory's condition didn't get better over the course of those 2 drills. In fact, it just got worse. And because Coach Taylor assembled a firing squad of 15 students to run and literally tackle Rory Street to death, Rory is no longer with us to tell her about what other symptoms she might have been experiencing that day. There was one person who was in charge of all of these student athletes. One person who from the very beginning saw something was different, something was wrong, and did not act. That person is Coach Reese Taylor. We ask you to find Reese Taylor liable for the negligence that caused Rory Street's death. Thank you.
Defense closing argument.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
May it please the court. It wasn't the coach, it was the cocaine. See, when Coach Taylor saw that one of her own was goofing off during practice, she implemented disciplinary measures to get Rory Street's head right back in the game. But you see, on this day, for whatever reason, those drills somehow couldn't shake Rory's lack of focus. They were drills. They were rigorous and physically strenuous, sure, but they were drills that she and her teammates had done regularly before. So Coach designed a new drill, one that would capture Rory's attention, a slide tackle drill. You see, sure, maybe this format of slide tackle drills was new, but the play itself wasn't. Because what we heard throughout trial today is that this was the type of play that not only had Rory performed, but had perfected. It was completely unforeseeable that during this drill, Rory would collapse and pass away. Not a single person on that field knew that when Rory showed up soccer practice that day, she would have cocaine in her system. Couldn't tell a single person. Not her teammates, not the trainer, not her coach. As we heard today, certainly not her mom. See, the sad truth is that when it comes to Rory Street's death, all the intervention, all the discipline, and all the safety methods that were recommended to Coach Taylor could not have prevented this tragedy. Because it wasn't the coach. It was the cocaine. No one deserves to be harmed while doing nothing more than playing the sport that they love. And again, we extend our deepest condolences to the Street family for the loss of their daughter. But it's important that we separate the pain and the sympathy that we all feel and focus on the facts. Because you see, the facts here are very clear, and they only point to one logical outcome. It wasn't the coach. See, when it comes to assigning fault, you're going to be guided by a very, very important document. It's a document called the verdict form, and it contains instructions on how you should evaluate the evidence presented today. And it's going to help you come to a verdict by answering two questions. First, was Reese Taylor negligent? And if she was, and second, did her conduct become the proximate cause of Rory's death? So let's take these questions and answer them one at a time. Let's start with negligence. See, negligence means the failure to use care. And so for someone in Coach Taylor's situation, it means failing to act as a responsible and reasonable soccer coach would. And we know that she did just that. We know that she did act as a responsible and reasonable coach would have. And if you find that she did act in that manner, then she can't be found liable for negligence. You see, on September 7th, 2018, it was hot outside. I mean, it's Waco, Texas, after all, and it sure gets hot here. And it's been hot there for the 26 years that Coach Taylor had led practices each and every afternoon. In fact, you heard from Aubrey Saracen herself. That wasn't uncommon. Practicing out in the hot heat wasn't uncommon. Rory practicing outside in the heat wasn't uncommon. But what you also heard is that in that time, that Coach Taylor had been the coach at Waco High School. We didn't hear anything about anybody having any problems with heat exhaustion or heat stroke. There's no evidence that any of the other players on September 7th, 2018 had any sort of problems. So when we focus on Rory, the question is, well, so what was so special about her? I mean, you have Aubrey Saracen, after all, coming before us and telling us that, well, as opposing counsel put it, these were obvious signs. Someone who's pale, someone who's clutching their chest, someone who's saying that they feel funny. And you have to ask yourself, well, if Coach Taylor or Trainer Merriweather had known about this, what would they have done? And Coach Taylor answered that question for you. Had I seen that, had Rory come and told me that, had Aubrey come and told me that, I certainly would have made her leave the field. And so at this point, as opposing counsel pointed out, something seemed different. Rory was goofing off. And yes, we agree that was unusual for Rory, but I want to make this clear, it wasn't uncommon. In fact, what you heard from both Jess Merriweather and Coach Taylor, Rory had a disciplinary issue sometimes. One that only Coach Taylor's methods could correct. Because you see, what this case boils down to is really a discipline problem, not a heat exhaustion problem. There were no objective signs that could make anything obvious to any person on that field that something was wrong with Rory other than the fact that she simply didn't want to be there. I mean, you have a star player who can't even figure out how to stand in the right spot, who's goofing off with Aubrey doing Burma Road. A star player whose conduct is affecting the rest of the team. And so at this point, Coach Taylor has a decision to make. And that decision is to send Rory over to Burma Road to run the drills that are tried and true traditions at Waco High School. Drills which she told you she'd never had a problem with before. In fact, as she understood them, they were safe. But she also made something else very, very clear. She gave all her players breaks so they could relax and rest if they needed to. She obviously allowed them to go get water if they needed to. Now, opposing counsel wants you to believe that, well, it was recommended that you have these breaks and that you hold these breaks. But in fact, she gave that power to her players. She allowed them to take breaks when they needed to, when they wanted to. And what you heard is that when apparently Rory was struggling on Burma Road, well, she didn't stop at all. She didn't stop to take a break. She didn't stop to go get water. She didn't stop to go up to Coach Taylor and say, look, I understand that you're upset with me, but I just can't today. I don't feel well. And again, I don't mean to sound like I'm blaming Rory, but it's important to highlight the fact that Coach Taylor wasn't aware of any of this because Rory kept it to herself. Just like she did the cocaine. So that brings us to proximate cause. Now, opposing counsel would have you believe that, well, it was heat exhaustion brought on by not only just all of the physical and strenuous activity that was going on, but most importantly, it was the slide tackling drill. But I want you to recall Coach Taylor's testimony. I mean, she was a competent and knowledgeable coach, someone who attends lectures constantly and consistently, not only to better herself, but to better her players. And she told you that when she attends these lectures, well, sometimes she gets new ideas, but she only implements them when they're safe. And so when she saw Rory goofing off on the practice field and goofing off over on Burma Road drill, what she decided is, well, she was going to implement a new kind of slide tackling drill, one that she believed was safe. Now, keep in mind, opposing counsel would have you believe that, well, this drill was more brutal than it actually was. That there were students who were physically charging their full weight towards Rory and tackling her to the ground, but that's just not the case. What we have here is a common play practiced at a scrimmage. And sure, it was in an uncommon method, but nonetheless, it was safe. And again, this was a play that Rory had not only practiced, but perfected. So when Coach Taylor walked up to her, saw that she was struggling, helped her, not yanked her, but helped her to her feet. When she looked Rory in the face, there was no obvious signs that anything was wrong. It was important to note that there is a distinction between physical exhaustion and heat exhaustion. And as far as Coach Taylor understood, Rory was just getting tired. See, as much as Ms. Street would have you believe, this slide tackling drill was not punishment. It was discipline. It was about performance. It was about making sure that Rory was alert, that she was agile, that she was paying attention, that there was no room for idle moments or for her to run off and goof off elsewhere. It was to maintain her focus. And it's unfortunate that it was during this drill that she collapsed. and passed away. But see, when we're talking about proximate cause, we're asking, was it that act that specifically caused her death? And the answer is no. It wasn't the heat exhaustion. It wasn't a heat stroke brought on by Coach Taylor's disciplinary conduct. It was the cocaine. What you're going to have before you is our expert witness's report. His name's Spencer London, and he's a toxicologist. What he's going to tell you is that when he reviewed the autopsy report and the toxicology report, one thing was made very clear to him, that there was 60 nanograms per milliliter of cocaine found in Rory's bloodstream. Sure, opposing counsel might point out, maybe this is a nominal amount. And in fact, our expert agrees to that. But what he also says is, well, the blood was drawn 26 hours later. So in fact, using dissipation rates, it may have been substantially higher at the time when Rory was on that field. Now, in that toxicologist report that you'll have with you, it's going to walk through some of the symptoms that are associated with cocaine use. You see, cocaine is an extremely dangerous drug, especially for a high school student like Rory, who was engaging in physical activity. Some of the symptoms include dilated pupils, raised body temperature, raised blood pressure, fast heartbeat, chest pains, and most importantly, constricted blood vessels. And apart from these symptoms, cocaine can cause another serious, more invisible condition. It's one called hyperthermia. See, that's basically when the body's natural cooling process is inhibited because the blood vessels are restricted to the point that they can't get blood where they need to. And so as a result, the body's threshold temperature for heat stroke is lowered. Hyperthermia is a symptom of cocaine use. And so that means for someone in Rory's position who's ingested cocaine and walking out on to the field, 103-degree heat, and that Waco humidity, it was only a matter of time before she collapsed. See, this is the science. Every symptom that Aubrey described is consistent with cocaine use. Every symptom that was reported in the toxicology report is attributed to cocaine use. And in fact, when you look at that autopsy report, it's going to tell you, yes, the cause of death was a sudden cardiac attack, but more importantly, the coroner couldn't figure out what the cause of death was. And Mr. London just told you, wasn't the coach, wasn't the heat exhaustion, wasn't a heat stroke, it was the cocaine. At the end of the day, Rory shouldn't have taken cocaine. And we understand maybe she wanted to experiment. We don't know the reasons why she took it or how she took it. But what we do know is that, well, she did. It was found in her system. And unfortunately, it was that deadly cocktail of cocaine, heat, physical exertion that caused her death. And we understand that this death is tragic, and we understand that opposing counsel, Ms. Streets, they want someone to blame. But unfortunately, for them, it's just not Coach Taylor. Because at the end of the day, what all the facts point to, the one logical outcome here, was that it wasn't the coach, it was the cocaine. Find Coach Taylor not liable. Thank you.
You have 5 minutes and 8 seconds for your rebuttal.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
What was special about Rory Street? What was special was that Rory was a gifted, talented high school athlete, a human life. What could Coach Taylor have done differently? Let's walk through that. As practice started, Coach Taylor noticed that this talented soccer athlete was missing goals she should normally be making, was struggling to find her position on a field. Coach Taylor could have called a break. Coach Taylor didn't call a break. Coach Taylor could have asked what was wrong, but didn't. Coach Taylor instead sent Rory to be disciplined by running laps on Burma Hill. You heard today that this discipline is normally effective. Rory normally responds to it. Rory continued to not keep up, continued to struggle and be fatigued. Coach Taylor could have called a break, could have asked what was wrong, but didn't. Instead, she then immediately sent Rory to be disciplined in a new way, an untested way, by subjecting her to repeated slide tackles, a technique that, as you heard, Rory had perfected. This wasn't about training skill level. This was about discipline. A technique that was perfected, and a high school athlete who was seen struggling with that perfected technique had repeatedly be pulled off the ground. Coach Taylor could have called for a break, but she didn't. When Rory collapsed and started convulsing, Coach Taylor could have called for an ambulance. Coach Taylor didn't. Coach Taylor told you she wouldn't have done anything differently.
All right, thank you, Mr. Meinkoff. Court is now, I forgot the word, but we're out of session for right now. I'm gonna go and check in and make sure that we have all of our ballots in. Judges, if you would all go ahead and submit those to Robert. I do need to ask everyone to stay in the Zoom meeting until we can confirm that we have all of the ballots received, and then I will come back and release you as soon as we have those in. Great job to both of y'all. Good luck with the rest of the competition.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome job, Miss Lady.
Thank you as well.